right, here we go. Hello, everybody. This is Last Minute Movies. I'm your host, Ali, and the other boy.
Egor. I don't know how to present myself.
Our intros, bro. We gotta work on them.
We gotta work on them.
Alright. Today, what are we gonna be talking about, Egor?
Ooh, today's especially exciting. We're gonna talk about the movie that comes from the nearby future in the post-apocalyptic world with mega cities, mega structures, mega populations, and judges. We're gonna talk about Dredd. We're gonna talk about the new Dredd movie.
Yes. And today we're gonna be talking about Helmet Batman That Kills. So
yeah. So Ali, you saw the movie recently. So what is like your hot take on, maybe like just tell us your thoughts.
Ooh. Alright, well, before I go super hot take, because okay, so like pretty much like every film that we've talked about through Last Minute Movies so far, each episode, has been has been like Egor and I kind of like dick riding the film.
If that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what it's been, right? But sure. This one, we both have some hot takes for the film that, when you have a hot take on a film, especially if it's comic books, oh man, the nerds, they'll flame you. But, I think we have some valid points. We're not going to be like, oh, this film is fucking terrible, it's garbage, because it's not. It is actually, objectively, it is a good film. I mean, I guess all art is subjective, right? But I say that it's a good film. But there's just certain problems that I have with it. But before we get to those problems and all of that, let's talk a little bit, about the story and the setting, and so we can lead into that. So Egor, do you want to take us away?
Sure. The story of Judge Dredd is actually fairly straightforward. Judge Dredd is kind of like a legendary judge in this post-apocalyptic future, where he's a part of this extremely militarized police force that can only deal with a very small amount of crimes that are happening in the 800 million populated megacity. And so Dredd is kind of our main character who goes on a mission with a rookie. What was her name? Anderson, right?
Yes, Judge Anderson.
Yeah. So Judge Anderson kind of joins him in this mission. She did not pass the test. She failed it by a couple of points, but because she's a psyker, they kind of give her a second chance. She's able to read people's minds and thoughts and project her thoughts onto people's minds. It's a little vaguely explained, but it's pretty awesome. And
yeah, think like Professor X shit.
Something along those lines. And so the two of them go to this place called Peach Trees, which is one of these mega blocks in the mega city, and discover that there's a whole kind of like a criminal compound going on with the manufacturing of a drug called slow-mo that makes your perception of time slow down to 1%, and everything just becomes really slow, and it's like a futuristic drug.
Yeah, it's basically like Jet from Fallout. There's actually a lot of Fallout vibes.
Honestly, it does give me Fallout vibes.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, definitely.
I mean, it's like the same drug in Fallout 4.
Yeah. So, and as they get to Peach Trees, it's a pretty much kind of fairly linear, character tries to slay the dragon type thing, where they're in the first floor of this giant 200-story apartment block, and they're trying to move their way up to the level 200, where this evil leader of this crime gang called Ma,
played by Cersei Lannister,
and she's incredible. Pretty much every actor in this movie is pretty much spot on, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, they're pretty spot on.
I think the characters and the cast alone tells a great story with the way they deliver it. But yeah, so they're trying to fight their way up while being cut off from the rest of the world, and just the two judges against a whole crime kind of family syndicate. Yeah. And yeah, in the end they find her and they slay her, and it's pretty much the movie, except there's more to it.
Yeah, so to get on to the the whole like nitty gritty sort of stuff about it is that, you know, in this post-apocalyptic world, we have judges, right? And Judge Dredd, he's like one of the most famous judges in the Judge Dredd. The judges basically, and how the law system works now, is that it goes through. There's one judge, and he's kind of like a militarized sort of figure. So it's kind of like an authoritarian sort of, I guess you could say dictatorship, you know, something like that, where the judges basically we're basically. Yeah, more or less. Where, like, the judges are, in this universe, are basically, like, all the different judicial systems combined into one. So we have the police officers, we have the actual judges who's going to decide, and we have, I don't know. Like
the
prosecutor. Yeah, the prosecutor or executioner or whatever. So they're all rolled into one, right? And they go around the city establishing order. And basically, Judge Dredd is a person who takes his job extremely serious. The first scene we see him in is basically him going around, driving around. He's shooting at these guys that are kind of like speeding. They have the speed drug, and they end up like hitting people. Some good old GTA 5 kind of shit. and you know, he goes and he executes them and all that, and then he heads back to headquarters where he meets Judge Anderson. And obviously, as Egor mentioned before, she has psychic powers and all of that, and she's able to tap into people's like emotions and their thoughts and their memories and all that kind of stuff. And she feels like, you know, oh, there's a lot of anger and all of that, but then something else in this film, and then she says like something else and all of that, and then basically you know, they go through adventuring and all that kind of stuff. So everything Egor mentioned before pretty much comes into play, and this is kind of where, I mean, I don't want to start shitting on the film immediately, because it's not like I am shitting on it, but there's just critiques I have. So
feel free to shit.
So I guess that we can mention, like, the first sort of problem that I have with the film is the fact that, like what I mentioned before with Judge Anderson, she's like, you know, there's something there, there's a lot of anger, but there's also something else, right? And yeah, like, you can definitely, like, subtly there is something else, because usually judges are just pretty harsh about their job, but there's times where, because Judge Anderson, so since she's such an empath, she kind of feels for everybody, and she hesitates to pull the trigger sometimes, and Judge Dredd's kind of the complete opposite. But there are times throughout the film where he's like, okay, you know, I'll spare this person, or like with these kids that are supposed to ambush her and Dredd, and instead of like shooting them, which I guess a normal judge would do, he ends up just tasing them. So there are moments where he spares people, which I guess goes to show that he's a little bit more of an empathic character than we really judge him for. I hate you. But I'm so sorry. But then Judge Anderson and he kind of figures that side of himself through Judge Anderson and being with her and all that kind of stuff. But I do
except we don't really get to see it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another thing is that we don't really get to see it that much, and we don't really know anything about Judge Dredd either. Like, he just kind of, like, you know, he's just kind of a hard ass, and we don't really know why he is the way he is. And I feel like that's something that is a little bit of a disservice to the film, is that he kind of suffers through a little bit of a flat character arc. Not to say that you have to have this amazing, huge exploration in every sort of media that you have and all that, although it is highly recommended. But you can make flat characters work in media just as long as the other characters are evolving from it, which they do. But I feel like specifically he goes through such a subtle change that I actually wish that we would know his backstory and knew what made him tick, knew what made him have his morals and why he has these morals and what's the backstory to that, so that we could understand why he doles out such harsh punishment and all this kind of stuff, and why he is the way he is, because I feel like it would service the story that they're telling a little bit more.
You know, I had the same problem with the characterization of Dredd specifically because, I mean, the movie is literally named Dredd, but the person who really goes through the character arc and change is technically Rookie Anderson. And to me, it seemed like a missed opportunity when she looks at Dredd through like the wall and reads his thoughts and kind of manages to assess it for a second. That Dredd is presented as such a perfectionist character who's just so law-abiding, and in this film, like, you know, we meet people that are against the law, we meet regular kind of citizens that just want peaceful lives, we meet people that are caught up in the middle of violence, we meet judges who disagree with the, you know, rule of law. Yet Dredd is like this kind of uniquely presented character in a story that just, you know, follows everything by the book perfectly. And if we were to give in a tiny, tiny piece of information as to what motivates this guy to do exactly what he wants to do, and, you know, the way he does things, it would make it so much more engaging. And that one
it's so much
scene,
more interesting. Yeah.
Yes. And
especially when the other
scene,
judges start to turn on him as well.
Yeah.
Like later on in the film.
Yeah,
but go on. Sorry.
Sorry. The one scene with Anderson just kind of trying to assess him before she gets cut off. I wish she could speak for like another 5 seconds, and that information would just give me just enough to cling on the character and really be with it for the rest of the film. However, the film doesn't lack its redeeming qualities, in my opinion. Like the personality of Dredd is definitely kind of goes down the drain at some point. But that's not really what we care about because it is not lacking complex characters in general.
Yeah, and before the nerds start to flame the comments and they're like, "Well, we already know his origin story and it doesn't matter. It's about him looking cool in the helmet, unlike Sylvester Stallone did." It's like, no. There's a difference between comic books and filmmaking, right? Now, they can absolutely coexist hand in hand. Think about all the amazing comic book films there are. Spider-Man 2, The Dark Knight, Daredevil, even though it's a show. Like, it's amazing, but you don't have to follow every single thing from the comic book. Like, when I'm watching Daredevil Season 3, and pretty much they do the whole born-again story from the comics, they don't take every single panel from it. But in order to format it into film ways, there has to be changes you can make. You don't necessarily have to change his origin story, but just delving a little bit into it, or even changing some aspects of it in order to service the story is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I just feel like, again, like, we have this guy who's so strict by the book, so gung-ho by the law, there has to be a reason why he's like that. And once we get later on to the point where we see all the other judges like turn on him and they sell out for Ma's character to have a bunch of credits or money and all that kind of stuff, and we see how that works out for him, it's just, while it's cool, it's like, oh, look at Judge Dredd facing all these other judges. Why I feel it kind of lacks is because a battle like this should be more about the philosophical and psychological differences between these characters more than just, oh, look at one character fight another character. It's like Batman stories, right? The most interesting thing about Batman is not whether he's gonna, beat up the Joker and take him back to Arkham Asylum, or whether he'll be able to go against Bane or whatever. It's not really about that. It's about how far is he willing to go in order to get things done, and does he have to cross the line? And I think that's the true passion of comic books, is that it's always the morals that are ahead of it. It's like, if it's just mindless action, then he's just another dude in an action film. He's not distinct. There's nothing about it. It's like, it's why I hated Batman versus Superman so much, because you took away his no killing rule. And Batman's no killing rule is the reason why he's Batman. And if you take that out, he's not fucking Batman anymore. He's just a dude in a bat suit shooting people.
This is why
take away all the complexity of the character. And I'm not going to go as far as to say that Dredd was as bad as Batman versus Superman. I mean, Lord, no. Like,
no, yeah,
I'm not going to give it that. It's way better. But I feel like that there was something that missed. That there was just something missing there. And I think what just would have been so interesting is that we can get is that if they really got more into the mind of Dredd himself, and see, here's the thing that's beautiful about this film is that it's so much more of a show and don't tell kind of film, like the whole drug situation. When they first got high and all of that, I just thought it was some really weird slow motion kind of filter that action movies do, and I'm like, makes no sense, this is stupid, I hate it. And then it comes to find out that, oh, it's actually the drugs that are making them go in slow-mo. What a perfect creative way to add slow motion to your film. It's so intricate, so weird. It's just, it works so well within that setting. Later on, when I watched it, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of brilliant. They actually gave us a reason why they're going to do slow-mo. That's so creative. And I feel like it would have been even more of a... And so you have more of a show-don't-tell sort of thing, right? So why can't you do that with Dredd's backstory? Like, you don't have to... He doesn't have to give this whole speech about, oh, this person died or whatever. And I don't know much about Judge Dredd, but you could just visually show some things, like
memories,
his
in those
backstory,
flashbacks.
like memories, exactly, of Judge Anderson looking into his memories, and you could just see him reacting to a specific situation that he was presented with, which changed him into the man that he is today. It's the show don't tell thing. You can just show that the story gives you that, and you don't use it. Like
Yep.
It's so maddening.
Like you have a perfect plot vessel for it.
You have perfect way to do it. Yeah.
Now, let's step away from the story flaws and just talk about the cinematography for a second. Because you mentioned the slow-mo, and I feel like that's beauty on its own. And that's like one of the beautiful redeeming qualities of this film. Like, it's based on a comic book, and usually the cinematography choices for movies like that are very much, they're not necessarily limited to, but the coverage would be similar that the comic book has it. Have everybody look stoic and explosions and the epic nature of it. But I feel like in Dredd, the editing and the cinematography are kind of taking it a couple extra steps they absolutely didn't need to take to portray the gritty atmosphere of Dredd and the world they're in and the story they're telling. They just really thought through the shots, and we're treating it as a film about people instead of just a concept arc or like the events. And by that I mean, like, the flashback sequences I think are great, and the way they're staged and framed, there's the close-ups, and just kind of like the way it's executed to be wired towards the person's individual experiences. They're just kind of putting you into the scene and into the character, which is really great. I'm not talking about into the character's mind, because that's what the story does, but the shots themselves submerge you into it a lot better, and better than they kind of had a bar to meet. They just took it a couple extra steps. Now, on the top of that, you mentioned that it felt really Fallout-y, and I totally get it. And I think the main Fallout vibes I was getting was in Peach Trees, when the Cold War was put in and all of these blast doors closed down. I think my favorite kind of moment in the movie is just the way they use these visuals to embrace not only the world they're in and just kind of really put us into it, but it also works perfectly for the story. When those blast doors lower, we kind of see this shot of the roof of the building, of these doors slowly closing in, and then we see the shot of where Dredd and Anderson are at the very bottom of this giant building, and they just kind of see the sunlight disappearing in that hole. You're just like, shit, you're sealed. Yeah. You're fucked.
The sets and the visuals for this film were pretty amazing, and it drips of atmosphere. Like, it makes you want to be like, oh man, I want to know more about this world. I want to know more stories and all that. And I guess there was supposed to be a sequel, or maybe they're still working on that and all that kind of stuff, but it makes you want to see so much more about this universe. It's such an interesting place.
I honestly would not mind a sequel. With the way this film is shot,
so we can get Dredd's backstory.
Yeah, so we can get Dredd's backstory. But also, people would, people who wrote this and who created this, they knew that, Dredd as a subject matter in general, people go there to see explosions. Kind of the same formula Transformers use. Violence, explosions, crazy shit going on. They took it a step further while still delivering on all of those basic things. The action in this film is beautiful. In all of these shots and the slow-mo and all of that, it comes down into this very, very nice kind of mosaic that is super colorful and super blow-uppy. And I think with just sheer power of editing, pacing, visuals, and the soundscape in this film, to me, they kind of make up for like the weird storytelling moment with Dredd. Because here's like kind of my main redeeming quality. It's kind of the morality behind the characters. You mentioned also before that like we're gonna make our choices looking at the characters and the way the justice system kind of has to function, and who would do what, who would kill and who would tase, that type of thing. I think what's interesting about this film from like the moral standpoint is that we're not questioning the motives of the criminals in the film. They are just the ultimate villains in the story, the chaos kind of like people that embrace violence and that ruin lives of other people that just want to live in peace but kind of forced to subjugate themselves to the system. The real like moral questions are being asked from actions of Dredd, other corrupt judges, and Anderson herself. And those are like three very important standpoints. Like Mega City is kind of like a failed society in many ways, because judges can only respond to about 6% of all the crime that's being committed. And in the way that one of the corrupt judges puts it, while him and Dredd are having the shootout, he says that like Mega City is a meat grinder. People come on one end, meat comes out on the other. Our job is just to turn the handle. And you see, like, he also mentions that, he's been a judge for 20 years and nothing has changed. He's not making the world a better place. He's just bringing more death and suffering into it. And, you kind of like, in the given environment, in a given situation, you're kind of starting to understand his point a little bit. You're like, I mean, being corrupt is bad, but you kind of understand how one would come to this line of thinking. And, has zero empathy. It's very self-centered. Now, Dredd is somewhere in between. He commits to justice and law because that's something that we as humans, have a tendency to follow when we want safety and, security of some kind. And he really plays by the book, and that's why he would like tase those guys instead of killing them, because they're still children, they're new to this, and he understands that one way or another.
I feel like the central theme of the film was like morality versus reality. Like each character, you were asking how far are they gonna go in order to get what they want, and what's the bar that's gonna be crossed. So we see Judge Dredd's like, how far is he going to go for justice? And we see Ma's character, how far is she going to go to be empowered? And each character has specific situations that they were brought up with. And, it presents it to you like that. And it's like, okay, well, who's the bad guy in this situation? Like, obviously, Ma is the antagonist. But when you hear her backstory of how she was a prostitute and she had an abusive relationship and all that kind of stuff, and she killed her abuser and all that kind of stuff, it makes you feel for her in a lot of ways where you're like, well, okay, I understand,
really?
Why she did that.
You felt for her? Because
I felt for her. I mean, I didn't feel for her, but see, okay. Let me finish before you say anything. Let me finish.
Yeah.
You feel bad for her in that way, but I feel like the moral of the story is more so about not becoming the monster. When Judge Dredd, Judge Dredd is presented with a lot of things in this film where he could go completely over the edge, sell himself out to get out of danger, or kill all the kids and just be done with it, or whatever. But he chooses to stick by his morals and even adopt the more empathetic morals that Judge Anderson has, whereas Ma's, and the reason why she's the antagonist and the reason why she ultimately fails is because she completely disregards the morals that is presented to you, that what makes you human, and she kind of just disregards them. She ends up becoming the monster that she hated.
Yeah,
which
she
is why,
violence.
which leads to her ultimate demise, because as she says herself, I always figured one day, somebody would come after me or I'd be killed and all that kind of stuff. So she knows this is coming for her, And so And so anyways, like, and there's so many other themes that, you know, the film has, like consequentialism, you know, utilitarianism, again, which goes to the how far are you willing to go in order to save human lives, or like, are you going to kill this person in order to save this person? Does that make you morally good, morally bad? Like, it brings up all those kinds of questions. And, you know, I feel like it's funny because we kind of just talked about this, but I feel like the film answers those questions in the form of empathy, right? And the empathy is the saving grace for the protagonist, while the lack of leads to Ma's inevitable downfall.
Which makes sense. And, you know, the other idea is that violence breeds violence, which is in Ma's entire kind of arc. But, you know, we're talking about her character within the context of kind of what she means to the story and the morals she brings. Because I think while the casting is perfectly on point, the movie doesn't necessarily write enough for us to relate or not relate to her character to kind of make a clear distinction. And although it might be a good thing because it's ambiguous, it creates a lot, leaves a lot to the imagination, I think what really kind of helps is acting. That's when acting really steps in and makes it truly shine. And sometimes she's one hell of an actress.
Exactly, she is. And I feel like if the acting wasn't good in this film, I feel like the film would really have kind of lost its way, because the writing is somewhat iffy. Like, there's ultimately, it's good writing, but there's just specific things, like how we mentioned backstory wise, like I wish they would have, you know, maybe put in a, you know, 2 or 3 more rewrites just to really sharpen it up and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like the acting is what really like helps save this film as well in a lot of ways, is because we get that through how all of them act with each other. We see Judge Dredd, who's kind of closed himself off to society, which is why he never takes his helmet off and all that sort of stuff. And we see Judge Anderson, and she's more open to the community and to people, which is why she has her helmet off. And obviously, you know, and then you see Ma, and she's all scarred up, which goes to show, you know, her scars of what society has brought her and all that sort of stuff. So all of that is great, and the acting is it really tells that as well. These actors really portray how emotionally broken they are about the system or society and all that kind of stuff, or how they feel about it. And but I feel like the one lacking thing is just really the writing, you know.
Yeah.
Just Dredd, just more so Dredd. Like, I feel like if they would have tightened that up more, I feel like it would have been a pretty great film. Like, I rate it right now at like a 6 out of 10.
Really?
You know, 5.
I give it like
5.5. 5. I'm giving it like a 5.5, maybe like 6 out of 10. But I feel like if you,
I'm torn between 6.5 and 7. To be honest.
For me personally, I feel like if it was more tightly written in Judge Dredd's case, I feel like it would have been, you know, like an 8 or something like that. You know, don't judge me for that opinion, but that's how I feel.
Oh, you will be judged.
That speech was pretty good.
You know, so speaking of helmets, I just gotta like again mention the acting and say that. What's the actor's name for Dredd? I forgot.
Karl Urban.
He had to act the entire movie with just his bottom jaw. Because, you know, editors and pretty much, I mean, everybody in the film world just kind of has this idea that the eyes are the mirror of the soul, and, you know, it's like, that's kind of how we perceive characters in the film in the first place. But this dude has top half of his face covered through the entire movie. And yet he manages to give his character some personality just by using his bottom jaw. And I'm not talking about the times he just goes like this, you know, like showing his face. That was kind of hilarious, I'm not gonna lie. And that definitely kind of embraced this like comic book nature of the character.
It's like the Batman jaw, the famous Batman jaw.
Yes, yes. But, you know, like the things he says, the lines, the way he delivers them, he also put, you know, a lot of thought and, you know, kind of concentration into the character.
Great acting went to him. Like, just because his character, writing-wise, was a little bit lackluster does not mean that the actor wasn't awesome, because he was fucking amazing. And if you would have given him more depth, I felt like it would have been even better. I mean, I've seen Karl Urban act in, you know, complex things like The Boys. Like, it's fucking awesome, you know?
He's just
so good.
They're all good. Now, I want to talk about Anderson. and kind of her entire story. Because I think
Yeah.
if there is a real protagonist in this story, it would not necessarily be Dredd, because his arc doesn't necessarily change by the end of the film. You know, he is still committed
he's still
to
kind of the same guy.
yeah, he's committed to like bringing justice and law, and you know, kind of like doing that same exact thing he did before. The person who really goes through the change in the story is Anderson, because she is introduced to this new world, which, you know, kind of a job that she thought she really wanted, because she thought that, you know, justice is the way they are defining justice, is something that will allow her to kind of bring peace and, you know, make the world a better place. While by the end of the film, she realizes that it's just violence that breeds more violence, and that people just die for no reason, and most of them don't even have to be there. And, you know, she realizes that the profession of a judge is not for her. And I just kind of want to look deeper into it, because while the corrupt judge would be like on one side of the spectrum, and Dredd will be somewhere in the middle, it's like abiding the law but still committing acts of violence even though they are in the name of the law, Anderson refuses to do that by the end of the film. She looks at it and she goes like, I can read people's thoughts and I don't want to cause suffering. I am not ready to kill and execute on command. She is just not really fit to be a judge. She is totally suitable, but she doesn't think she wants to do that. And it's just such a major kind of revelation she gets by the end of it. But my favorite thing about it, which was like kind of what makes her the main character to me, are the reasons why. She executes. There's the beginning of the of like, you know, them being stuck at peach trees. She executes this man while kind of thinking twice. He kind of begs her for mercy, but you know, by law, his crime is an assault on a judge, so she has to execute him. And then she thinks about his family for a moment while kind of reading into his thoughts. Again, editing brilliantly put into it, just like a couple of seconds, so much information, so many emotions for the audience. Beautiful. And then later on in the story, which I also think was super creative, she like whispers into the door, calls the owner of the apartment by the name because they need to like hide in there, and she just knows it because she read her thoughts. And like, this is also, I'm kind of like segueing a lot, but this is kind of like my favorite part in the film as well, is the fact that we get to see the population of Megacity that is just caught up in this constant cycles of violence between the judges and the criminals. And you know, the reason why this woman, you know, kind of allows the judges to hide inside her apartment from all the people that are like roaming the floors looking for them, is because she wants to save her husband, who is also among those people with guns trying to, you know, kill them. She
doesn't want more violence.
Yeah, and like, you know, that's what most people in Mega City want. They just want peace, and you know, they don't want their loved ones to die. And then Anderson, you know, going back to the whole character thing, she realizes before they leave that, you know, her husband is the guy she killed earlier. That makes her contemplate her actions. And, you know, we don't see her do it. We're just giving these little information bits.
So then the next time where she meets Klanteki, that guy, the dude who is like that, he's like the hacker that was working for Moss.
Yeah.
She gauges in, she looks at his backstory this time, and this time she doesn't kill him, and she lets him go. Whereas before she looked into the other dude and she killed him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just goes to show that in a more violent world, you don't always want to respond with the same amount of violence, or else how different are you from Ma? You know? And she looks at that and she analyzes that, and then, you know, she lets him go.
Yeah. And, you know, it asks very interesting questions, you know, like, and like, I watched the movie for the first time maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I kind of liked it. I was like, well, I mean, it was pretty good. But watching it now, within kind of like all the crazy things that are happening in the world with the protests, Judge Dredd is presenting us with this like world study of, you know, a system that uses overwhelming force to police its citizens. Yeah. And, you know, it uses violence and execution of criminals as, you know, a mean of creating peace and stability within society. Mm-hmm. But the world we're presented with has anything but stability and peace. It's, you know, rid with violence, with organized crime, with poverty, and people just fear both police and criminals alike.
Yeah.
And if that is not a powerful message, that is just very relevant in our time.
Yeah, it asks you the question, just like we're asking ourselves every single day, what does protect and serve actually mean? At what point do you kind of like, soil that protect and serve meaning if you're acting no more as violent or as threatening or as unstable as the supposed bad guys are trying to catch,
Yeah, and I think it's just like Judge Dredd has been extremely underrated when it came out, which is kind of the reason why we're talking about it in the first place. It is not a perfect film, but it over-delivers
so maybe
in many ways.
Maybe I'll give it a little bit of a higher rating
Yeah.
than that. Maybe I'll give it like a 6.5. Yeah.
Word.
I'll give it
I
that.
think it's a solid 7, and it's so underrated, and it's just not enough people know about it.
Yeah.
And I think like this is the kind of movie that could totally use a sequel and just expand more on its own world.
On what does it mean to protect and serve and the actual role of the judges. See, the thing is that I don't want to not like this film. I mean, I like the film. Don't get me wrong. I like it. I'm not trying to hate on it just because, I'm a hater or anything like that. Like, I want to like any movie, bro. I want to like any movie. I don't want to watch a bad film unless it's The Room. But we'll talk about that one day. No, but I want to really, really like this. I want to give it a 10, but I just feel like, had we known, I'm going kind of back, but had we known the backstory of Dredd, like that protect and serve, like, okay, what does that really mean? How am I looking at it? Because I think what they were kind of trying to do in terms of questioning the system, it kind of fell apart on itself, by not really having that. Because Dredd represents, for the film, he represents, the law for our universe. We're getting it through his eyes,
Yeah.
And if he doesn't really have much emotional depth to him, then it's just kind of lost.
I'm just wondering, like, how come though, like trying to figure out, with those kind of lacking these little characterization bits for Dredd, I was just wondering how come I was still kind of feeling that emotion that the storyteller wanted me to feel when he got shot. I was like, oh no, like, I know that I wasn't like scared for the lives of others, and I certainly like didn't, maybe I wanted Dredd to kill the bad guy, and that's why I wanted him to live. Like, it's a rational type of empathy, or am I actually kind of feeling something for the character? Because yes, while we're missing his main story and kind of like the motivation of why he does what he does, I think what the film does provide us with are these like kind of basic points, basic kind of morality points we're giving Dredd. For like, he tased these, boys instead of shooting them, yes, but I feel like that's not necessarily a redeeming quality. Not that he had to be redeemed in the first place, because every criminal he kills is shown as a much worse type of human being than Dredd himself.
Yeah. Well, I feel like what was redeeming about that part actually was in, like, okay, so earlier he explains to Judge Anderson that, like, failure or your weapon being taken away or being taken hostage is, like, ultimate failure and all that kind of stuff. And she does end up getting held hostage to escape later. But then Dredd goes up to obviously stop the bad guys, but then also to save her, to try to, help her out. So it's like he's gained some sort of empathy and feeling for this person, whereas before things were just very black and white for him.
Yeah.
Which is understandable because we live in a very black and white world,
Yeah, that's subjective, but yeah, I get the point of movies.
I mean, like in the sense of the way that Dredd is looking at it, and the way that how. So when I say we live in a very like black and white world, it's like you have morally in a lot of ways we can live by it. Like a lot of people don't really recognize the gray of it, so they're like, okay, this person like did this and this was bad, and this person did this and that was bad. And our mindsets, we kind of live very black and white. Yeah. But, there's a lot of gray to it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of gray to it. And I think that is what Judge Dredd's, I guess that's sort of what his character arc is a little bit, but it's more him finding his moral gray area than everything just being black or white.
Yeah. And, I guess one of the final points that I did really enjoy about the film is a sense of balance that they find, because, Judge Dredd is like a very specific type of universe where things are done in a very specific way. In order for you to be on board with it, it requires like pages of explanation. And I think what they did really well is the combination of the shots that was, put together in the editing, combined with like the voiceover narration and the uses of numbers and percentages and kind of ratios. So like, they could have shown like widespread crime. Like how else can they show the world better than this moment where the beginning of the story, these three guys get thrown down the peach tree's kind of like central hole, and they fly down to 100 things, and then somebody calls 911, and you kind of see this red dot from peach trees on a giant map, and it slowly starts to zoom out, and you see like myriad of these red dots, and you're just like, shit. Like, I just saw this one act of violence happen that requires presence of a judge, and now we're gonna zoom out and just show you exactly how much there are and the multitude of it. And then later on they're gonna mention that judges can only handle 6%, so it's like up to them which ones to go to and which ones not to. And like, those are little things that this movie does so well. And when it comes to exposition specifically, it kind of shows it in this like inside out form. Instead of going like, the city is fucked up and you better believe me, and they would show like crowds and scale, instead they do the opposite. Like, they show this single guy getting high on slow-mo inside of this van, and like a guy next to him driving, and after them is the judge in a motorcycle. Like, what I'm saying is that we get the feel of that world through the gaze of individuals within that world. And that, I think, by itself is just a great achievement of like cinematography, editing, and writing combined. Because it's not jarring, it's interesting and engaging, it keeps the action going, and it gives the viewer all the information they need for the future references. I think one of the brilliant moments of it was showing the that little like balcony looking thing that was a skater kind of area that's right outside peach trees, kind of hovering above ground, like 100 floors above the ground. They show it kind of in this flyby shot early in the film without really explaining what it is or like, why it's there. We're just like, oh, a playground, cool, like it'd be like that. And later in the film, this becomes like one of these pivotal moments where they break through the wall from these giant machine guns and actually get in touch with like the mission control for the first time in the movie. And this is kind of their break when Dredd decides to go back in and keep fighting instead of waiting it out outside. Like, those little moments and that like very smart release of information through all the means that film has available does really good for the movie, and also allows it for a much more enjoyable viewing, because never at the point in the film I had to think, I wonder how this works or like how that works. My answers were, the answers are coming at the same time as the questions. And I think the main reason why that was the case, other than editing and sound, is the location and the way they build those sets, the greedy detail of all of those hallways and elevator shafts and apartments that those people live in, and the outfits that the people in peach trees wear. Like, all of those things, they create worlds, brick by brick, and like little tiny details, they just add up. And I think, I could compare it to a film that doesn't do it so well, like the previous Judge Dredd movie from the 70s.
Oh, God.
Like, in there, everything looks like a prop, Sylvester Stallone looks like a prop. Yeah, like, his armor.
Where's the helmet?
Yeah, like, he never wears a helmet, and you're like, it's not real. That it's just, your suspension of disbelief.
Place,
yeah. Like, you can only see that movie through your suspension of disbelief, while Dredd manages to achieve this degree of immersion. And I guess what I was saying at the beginning,
it feels like real. Like,
yeah,
it feels very human. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
and it's like the worst Gotham City.
Yeah, that's valid.
Yeah,
and like what I was saying at the beginning is that it achieves this degree of immersion that it doesn't have to achieve. Like, it's not a requirement for a film like Dredd. First of all, the bar was set by the Dredd from the 70s, which, was not particularly great. So they knew they had to match that.
That's a pretty low bar.
Yeah. Like, it's a low bar to match. But they still took these extra steps, to tell the story in such detail and like, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess specificity. They created an immersive film that did not have to be that immersive, but they still took these extra steps to really make it, its best, which I think is, that alone deserves this like extra attention, and it deserves, maybe potentially a second film, that can improve upon the things that the first one didn't do so well, but also embrace the things that work, because holy shit, like, it's hard to create immersive movies, and Dredd definitely did that for me.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Despite all the flaws that I have. Yeah. That's pretty much it, though. I don't have much else to say.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I mean, if you haven't seen Dredd, please go watch it. And
yeah, despite my words, go watch it.
Guys, thank you for watching the videos. It means a lot. Please leave a like. Do that whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, like, like, obviously I had my words about this film, but, go watch it. Come write in the comments why I'm wrong, why I'm an idiot, and I don't get filmmaking and all that kind of stuff. And we can talk about it, all that kind of stuff. But as Egor said, thank you for watching. Like if you like the video, subscribe, and we'll judge you later.
We'll see you next week.